Hi everyone. This lecture is goes with chapter 1 in the Barsky text. That chapter is titled "Values: Mine, Theirs, and Ours." So we're going to talk about values for a few minutes in this lecture. Let me just expand the screen a little bit here so you can see everything. So values are sort of deeply held preferences that we all have. They tell us sort of what is good. They provide clues into how we should act in tough situations. And I mean, values in some ways are analogous to our sort of moral compass, right? I mean, they tell us what we should do when we're faced with a tough decision. We in sort of these first couple of weeks of class are going to go through a process really of what's called values clarification. And really in that process, what we're going to be doing is understanding, labeling, defining, and refining our own values. This is kind of an ongoing process. It's not something that you can do quickly. And it's also a process that really can't be done correctly or incorrectly. It has to be done sort of honestly, right? So it has to be done in a way that that sort of makes sense for you and helps you grow as a clinician, as a social worker, and as an agent of change. The page 16 in the book lists they list 22 different kinds of values: physical safety, emotional pain, personal happiness, material wealth, leading a meaningful life, that kind of thing. There's certainly others, and then there's space for you to add your own in there. But think for a minute about what kinds of values are important to you. Things like family or friends or social relationships might be important, and these are all these are all good things, and like I said, things that sort of provide a direction for action when you're faced with a tough decision. Now, importantly, the book mentions two concepts that I just want to highlight real quick. It mentions a thing called instrumental values, and instrumental values are really ways of behaving. And so when I say that values provide clues for action in certain situations, it's really those instrumental values that help provide those clues in some way. Terminal values are values about how things should be, or what the end state of things should be. And these also provide insights for action in tough situations. If we hold a value, that often provides an avenue for arriving at that value, and that avenue for arriving at that value is sort of the direction for action. So to start this sort of values clarification process, take a look at those items on page 16. You can rate them if you want to, but just give some thought to things that are important or not important. It does that chart on page 16 does list some things that are maybe not very common values. It lists things like anger, so you might rate that one a little bit negatively. But you might also label something like the importance of emotional expression. You might value the importance of emotional expression a little bit more strongly. But then after that, give some thought to what your values say about you. Who do they define you as a person? Do they give some insight into your character? And if so, what's that about? As you start to think about these things, these are things that you'll report about in an assignment to me in a couple of weeks. That sort of autobiographical assignment. Now, the other thing we're going to sort of be doing in this course is think about how our personal values might be in conflict with what we need to do as a professional. And so a big part of the reason we're going through sort of a values clarification is to think about how values our own values might lead us down the wrong way in a practice situation. I've got a couple of big ideas coming up for you here in just a minute. So we've talked about, the title of this chapter is called Mine, Theirs, and Ours. So mine that's sort of the values clarification process that we're going through. Their values refers to the values that our clients have or value that others have. So that might be people who simply are different from us or simply people who aren't us. But there are some values that we might think about sort of as controversial, things like humiliation or pain or separation of races. We can sort of orient values on sort of a couple of different continuums here. We can orient values on an individualism versus communitarianism continuum, and that simply means if you're on the individual side, it simply means that the individual should take precedent or priority over the group or some unit of multiple people. And communitarianism simply means that the group, the family, the society, however you want to think about it, is more important than the individual. So it sort of informs where we assign resources and worth and value, that kind of thing. You can think about time flexible and time rigid the same way. Time flexible obviously refers to a great deal of flexibility with time, really not placing much importance on time as a value. And then on the other hand, time rigid basically means that if you're going to spend an hour doing something, you spend an hour doing something, or some other value. We live in a capitalist country, quite obviously, so our view of time tends to be pretty rigid. Social workers are often practicing in billable hours, which is, billable hour is like 45 or 50 minutes long, and the 10 or 15 minutes left over in that hour is for paperwork and documentation and that kinds of things. But you may be a person who personally is more time flexible, and that's fine. You just have to give some thought to how a time flexible versus a time rigid approach is going to inform your practice. Similarly, there's a continuum, of material wealth and spirituality, and one that and a continuum where we can sort of orient privacy and open access to information. All of these things have strengths and weaknesses, and one way or the other. And oftentimes, as a society, these are certainly not the only continuums, but oftentimes as a society, we put emphasis on one side of the continuum or another, and that's sort of how society influences our own personal values. The R's values component of the textbook refers to the values really that we have as professional social workers and as members of NASW. The syllabus and QCA sort of expects that you join NASW, and what that means when you join NASW is that you're going to adhere to these sets of professional values. So they are service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, importance of human relationships, integrity and competence. And we'll spend some time this semester sort of talking about what it is each of these things mean. But needless to say, these are things that are sort of central to our profession and help guide our work as professionals. There are two additional values. These are prescribed by CSWE, which is the Council on Social Work Education, and they are human rights and scientific integrity. Now, the NASW is the National Association of Social Workers, and that's sort of the professional association of social workers, and they prescribe the 6 values there. CSWE is what accredits social work training programs, including ours. And so because we're members of a CSWE accredited program, we're bound by the values in the NASW Code of Ethics, and then the 2 additional values prescribed by CSWE, and they are human rights and scientific inquiry. And again, we're going to spend some time thinking about these this semester. Let me just adjust this so we can see. looks like my picture is taking over that one. Okay, so there we go. So one of the things we're going to think about this semester is this idea of professional values versus personal values. There might be times when our professional values and personal values really are in conflict or don't challenge each other, but they might be. And we have to give some thought to how we negotiate that. One of the so the answer to which set of values we prioritize when values are in conflict, we prioritize professional values always. There's no exception. The difficulty comes with reconciling that, and that's sort of what we need to do, and that's why we spend the time on the values clarification piece that we talked about a couple of slides ago. So that's what I mean by the second bullet point here. That's part of our task, is really to examine our own values on clients. What's the reason we do this? The reason we do this is to avoid imposing our own values on clients. That simply is inappropriate, and it's actually in conflict with some of the values that are prescribed by CSWE. In particular, that's in conflict with social justice, dignity and worth of the person, and this idea of integrity. So we don't impose our own values on clients. Rather, what we help clients to do is articulate their own values and act in ways that accords with the values that they've sort of arrived at. Okay, so that ends the lecture. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or post on the discussion board.